known as Terry Debosage. I'm also called Zungabwit, and I got that name as an adult. But I also have another name that was given to me when I was, I don't know, maybe 3 years old or something like that. My grandmother raised me when I was a boy, and one time something came to me, and I asked her, I says, a memory came to me, and I remember this old log house up in Lakeview here, my great-grandfather's house. I remembered I was being passed around. Back then we just had coal oil lamps and whatnot. It was evening, and it was dark in the room, but everybody was passing me around. I asked her what was going on, and she said that her father, my great-grandfather, gave me a name. And I asked her, what was that name? She said she forgot, but it had to do with working with paper. So sometimes I just called myself Mzinigan on Nini. So I kind of like that name because it comes from my great-grandfather in ceremony. So I'm Ojibwe, although there's Potawatomi in there. As far as the Ojibwe part, my family, my father was Ernest Debosage. His father was Squatic, also called David Debosage. He was a young farmer before he joined the army in World War I. My father served in World War II with the Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Highlanders, the SD&Gs. Remember a couple of the veterans calling themselves sand, dust, and gravel. But, like I said, my father was with the SD&Gs, had an uncle with the Essex Scottish. He lost his leg in France. Another uncle, he was with the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry. He was wounded in Europe also, and sent as reinforcements to other battalions. And my grandfather ended up with a couple of other regiments there, and he eventually went to France. I think it was the 50th or 60th Battalion, and participated in a couple of battles, and he was at Vimy Ridge. And right after the fighting at Vimy Ridge, he was severely wounded at an area known as the Slag Heap. I found that's in the history books. He was hit with an artillery shell of all things. Shrapnel got him across the chest. When I was a boy, I used to be able to put my hand into the indentations in his chest there. So yeah, he was almost killed. He was in the hospital for quite a long time. And he came home and got into business here. He was a businessman owned trucks and stuff like that. And like I said, he had a store where we lived when I was really small. I guess he was quite successful relative to, One thing I find interesting about the veterans from, after World War I, Native people in Canada organized themselves politically. And the same thing happened after World War II. My father was telling me there was a man, I wish I could remember his name, my father knew the name, because I think he deserves to be honored. But I guess he traveled all over this area trying to get, this was not too long after World War II, to get all the Nishnawbe organized politically. And they agreed to meet, and they had a meeting. I don't know, I forget if it was in Sudbury or Toronto. And they agreed to form themselves as a body to fight for their rights and stuff like this. And the night they were going to leave, they went to that guy's hotel room to thank him for all his work, for getting them organized. Him and his brother, my Uncle Gus, they went to see him, and he was in his room crying because he was happy because he got everybody to get together. But he was also crying because he had no way to get home. You know, they operated out of their own pockets. And he did this all, and that's why I said he deserves to be honored. He sacrificed everything to try and get this accomplished. And so they took up a hat, they got everybody, they got enough money to at least get the guy home, to his own home. And the thing that struck me about this organizing, this group of men that got together, they eventually became the foundation of what is the Union of Ontario Indians today. So what I realized about after World War I and after World War II, the efforts to organize politically were done by the veterans. And it occurred to me, you know, these men, they'd left the reserves here, these small areas. You know, they had grown up under the thumb of the Indian agent. The Indian agent was God, you know. He had the power of life and death over you, and the priests, you know. You know, even as a little boy, my grandmother would go shopping off the reserve. She'd still get that paper for permission from the Indian agent for us to be off the reserve, you know. So it was, so mentally they were conditioned to live under this authority. But these men, they had gone overseas, and for the most part they all served in combat regiments. So they had been placed in situations where their lives and their lives of, you know, men in their squads and whatnot, they relied on your judgment, your ability to function, to stand up, to make decisions. They exercised autonomy in a degree that they had never experienced before, life and death. So when they came home, they weren't prepared to simply exist under the authority of the Indian agent anymore. So, you know, it's surprising how things happen, and I think that's how we got our political organization started, from these men that saw another, you know, they wanted to exist at another level. You know, we were a Ojibwe. My family was a Ojibwe, but we were all Nishnawbe. And it was just a given. You know, there was the Dawa and Potawatomi. But essentially the Potawatomi came from the United States. You know, after with all the things that were going on in the U.S. and, you know, came up as far as this area here, and it settled into different communities. But from what I understand, they weren't treated that well, you know, and most of them eventually ended up going back to the U.S. side. I never really heard what the reasons for that were, but that they didn't fully fit in. And just from the undercurrent of what I heard, we didn't fully accept them or something, but of course some of them stayed, but the majority moved back to the U.S. And of course the Adawa. I never heard too much about them when I was a boy. I think that one of the reasons for that is my family, speaking specifically of my family, we can't say we're from here originally. My father was born here, my mother was born here, my grandfathers were born here. My great-grandparents were also born here. Was the original Debosigi. I was always told that name. It either means it's a quality of light before, like let's say, before the sun actually comes up. It's a light my mother told me one time to look out there, and you could see as far as could be with such clear detail. And she said, that's Debosigi. And but I also hear, de heart, and the bosque, that exuding. So it could also mean, he said, one guy from Wiki told me, shining heart. But anyway, the original de bosque was my great-great-grandfather. And he signed the Manitoulin Treaty. But he wasn't born here. He came from Wikwemkong, and I'm not sure if that's where he was born. But we left Wikwemkong around 1820, 1830, and moved here. And De Bosque, when he moved here, several other families came too and settled this area. And the priests were so mad at them, they were excommunicated from the Catholic Church, which I take as a matter of pride. So we went back to being good old heathens. But before Wikwemkong, De Bosque's father, Nibokum, who was a warrior in the War of 1812, Nibokum was one of the men from this part of Ontario, what's known as Ontario now. Like I said, that fought in the War of 1812, and he was wounded in that war. There's a story of him that he led a large group of warriors from this area, and they were at a battle in southern Ontario, and they fighting alongside the British in this battle, and the British broke and ran on them, and so they all had to scatter, and it took a couple of days for them to start gathering back up together again. And so his warriors and his, all the other, the Strawbeck, started forming up again, and the British came to see them, and asked them, what do we do? What do we do? And they're discussing an attack, and so Nibokum complained to them, you guys broke and ran on us, and you know, pretty upset with the British, but the British, you know, because Nibockham had quite a bit of influence, they still needed him to help them in another battle. And so Nibockham organized their next attack, and there's a story of him lighting his pipe several times, communicating, and then getting his instructions, and then he instructed his men and the British. And what's interesting about this record of the battle is that they went into is he told the British about how they're going to go about things. They're going to attack this fort. And one of the things he told the British is, he says, we'll run up the British flag. I guess it was an American fort. You'll know we have captured the fort. We'll run up the British flag. And he says, you will be able to see it from Windsor, you know. So I'm wondering, was that Fort Detroit they took? I don't know all the details of the whole thing. There's a story I learned after, you know, that he had sent scouts to check out how many men and, you know, what they were about to attack. And there's a story about what happened there. They had to punish some of those scouts because they weren't telling the truth. But when the war ended, the War of 1812 ended, the British needed runners to go all, you know, around the Great Lakes to tell everybody to stop fighting. You know, this would have been quite a few weeks after the peace treaty was signed in Europe, you know, and for that information to get here, and then they had to start telling everybody, you know, to stop fighting. So two of the men that were sent to go tell all the Stabik to stop fighting were a Siknak from Quemkong, or Cross Village, and the other one was Nibockham, two men that had enough influence to be listened to by the other warriors. Well, anyways, about the War of 1812. I remember one of the stories in our family was this Nibockham had a lot of wives, and I couldn't understand that, you know, in our way of how could that be, you know? It wasn't the way I thought of things, you know, like the woman being center of the family and whatnot. And, you know, this idea of having lots of wives. And then it wasn't that many years ago, I was talking with some of the guys on the North Shore I know, and I had mentioned that. We were talking a bit about these things, and they said, oh, no, that's not what happened. And I said, what? And he says, so many men from the North Shore, Manitoulin area were killed in the War of 1812, and they said 600 warriors from this region died in that war. So many were killed that the men that made it back home took on the responsibility of helping to provide for the, you know, for these families where the fathers had been killed. So that's what actually happened. You know, it would be in keeping with veterans, you know, helping their brothers that didn't come home, you know. So helping their families. So I thought that sounded better to me. Like I said, this I don't know all that much about the Mnidoo Mnising history. I did hear one story that this was a sacred island that we weren't actually supposed to be living on here. I don't know how true that is. But and like as far as migration route, you know, I've heard in the ceremonies we you know, the Shabak people come from the east coast, come up that way. But I never really heard that much about it as a kid. Just like I said, specifically about my family, my father's side of the family. Like I said, we lived in Wikwemkong for a while, but before that, we Deboske's father, Nibokum, and his father lived at Penetanguishing area, Coldwater area. That's after the War of 1812. Before Penetanguishing, Nibokum and Oga lived at Botognosing. You know, that's way on the west end of this chain of islands here. Botognosing is called Drummond Island today, and that was a location of an important British fort before the War of 1812, and before that, Oga, Gitcho Oga, Nibokum's father, also came from what's called Saginaw Bay, Michigan, and Gitcho Oga was at the Treaty of Niagara, and then his son Nibokum, they lived at Drummond Island. And of course, after the War of 1812, since Nibokum and our people had been fighting for the British, they had to leave Drummond Island because that became a U.S. possession after the war, which is interesting because I came across this account. After the War of 1812, they established a boundary commission to establish the boundary to the Great Lakes. And it had British representatives and American representatives on this boat where they charted the boundary. And when they were headed westward to Lake Huron, and when they got to Drummond Island, there was a dispute. The Americans wanted to cut north to the channel between, you know, where, geez, what's that? The two islands, and go north around Drummond Island and come back down and then continue, you know, up to Sault Ste. Marie. But the British said, no, we keep south of Drummond Island. And they argued, but the British, you know, they kept arguing that, I mean, yeah, the Americans wanted to go north. They couldn't settle the issue, so they continued. They agreed they'd finished they finished their discussion on the return journey. So they continued all the way up and then to Lake Superior, to the end of Lake Superior. And on their way back, the British representative was known for, liked his drink, his booze. So they deliberately plied him with more booze before they got to Drummond Island. And when he was in a drunken state, got him to agree to put the boundary south of Drummond Island. And in the record I wrote, this was from the archives from one of the universities in Michigan. And so hereby the British lost one of their most important possessions, because like I said, there was a military fort there. I guess strategically it was an important fort. And they said, and they lost it in the same manner they caused the Indians to lose their lands, through the use of alcohol. So, you know, the Canadians always deny that they used alcohol in these things, but so that's why my family had to leave Drummond Island. It became an American possession, and we ended up at down around Coldwater, which the British government set up a training project there to train the Nishnawbek. I guess a lot were displaced from the American side. that had been fighting for the British and got them training them in agriculture, blacksmithing, building houses, that sort of thing. So that's probably where our people got, established in that, because, Kwamkong was noted for that, having all these trades and stuff like that. So we're very skilled in those kind of things by that time. And, to a large degree, after the War of 1812 and all that stuff, we had our own economies, We were farmers, boat builders, even as my grandmother used to tell me, all along the bay here, there was just all these sailboats, that our people used to build. And they're very utilitarian, sturdy boats that they're like the pickup truck of the day. There's no roads in those days, so most of them, travel is by boat in the warmer seasons. And they were called mackinaws. And I found out about those things too. They were built for quite a while, and they were copied from what I read about them. Is the white boat builders that arrived here took our canoes and expanded them, and that idea, and it eventually grew into a regular sized working sailboat, and that's how our people got around so readily. And one of the things too that one of the main big industries on the island, was a lot of hardwoods, and so making maple sugar was a huge industry in the early 1800s, 1700s, 1800s. And, back then, sugar was a luxury item, I did a lot of carpentry work most of my life, building houses, and also making different pieces of whatever. And I used to look up plans, get old plans, and these kitchen hutches from the 1800s, they had a little lock box, and that was where you stored your sugar, That's how valuable sugar was back then. You protected from your own family. So sugar, maple sugar was made here. Now a lot of people still make maple syrup here, and they realize how much sap you have to collect to make, a gallon of maple syrup. But then to refine that further into sugar, it would have taken enormous amounts of sap. And yet, what did I read one time? Just from Chiging, we were called Michigoetnong then. Just from here, 50 to 60,000 pounds of maple sugar used to leave here every year, and over 200,000 pounds off the island in total. So we were a major supplier of sugar for the colonies back then, and the American side too. Traders would come up here and buy the sugar. And commercial fishing, we were the only commercial fishers at that time. So, as a matter of fact, my great-grandfather, Louis Dubosque, had a fishing station where Providence Bay is now. And the British government used to provide us with barrels of salt to salt the fish, and that was all shipped out to the colonies. So I used to hear from the people I know from Saugeen, on the Bruce Peninsula, that even their people used to come up to Providence Bay to fish also. So Nishnawbek from all over, it's a perfect port, to dock in. You didn't see too much of that over here in this bay, and I found out, this bay, it's not conducive to sailboats. It was all sailboats in those days, because it's opened up to the north, which is deadly, in bad weather. So you can't have really big ships coming in there, and you need sheltered harbor. But anyway, so we had commercial fishing as an industry. We had the maple sugar industry. Another source of income for our people was the steamers. When the steamers start coming into this area, they needed fuel to fire the steam, produce the steam on the boats, and so our people had fueling stations. That this was simply wood. They cut the wood and sell to the steamers. And of course, like I said, we had all these other skills we picked up. So we were quite self-sufficient. We were very, very, very well established, to take care of ourselves, whatnot, and so we were doing quite well. That you want to know about the Three Fires Confederacy. Again, I can't say I actually heard that much talk about it. It was just given that, we existed here with my mental understanding of things was our family. We were all one people, even though there's the Dawa and the Potawatomi and us, the Nishnawbek. We're all Nishnawbek, but us, the Ojibwe. And like I said, when I was a boy, that nobody, for a while, nobody lived here on the island. And again, I can only talk about my own particular family's migration to here. And like I said, we did live in Wikwemkong, but we came from Coldwater, Penetanguishing area, but we had been displaced from Drummond Island because of the outcome of the War of 1812.
What's some of that, you said it was common knowledge, but I think children...
Those people had come from, like the Cross Village area. And I was told Cross Village, people think maybe it has a church influence, But no, that comes from our symbols, or our ceremonial symbols. And the cross, I think, meant the fire. And that was a symbol for, it could mean a lot of things. The spiritual, our spiritual understanding of everything. So that's the real meaning of Cross Village. Not too much other than that. We kind of deferred to the Odawa,